Hi, everyone. Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and today the Astrology Star Sisters are talking about the new moon forecast for Aries of 2025. My Astrology Star Sister, colleague, and friend, Madam Simon, is joining me today. Hi, Simon. How you doing?
Pretty good, Liz. How are you?
Good, thanks. Waiting for the weather to get a little warmer, which it's supposed to in a few days, and welcome spring. It's like, wow, that went pretty quick. I looked out this morning and my one tree is in bloom, and yesterday it wasn't. I mean, it could have had the buds, and I just didn't notice it. But it's all these white buds. It's really pretty.
I love the blooming trees here in spring. It's one of my favorite things about this area.
So, to get a hold of Madam Simon, her website is iconalchemy.com, and my website is alightpath.com. And we always enjoy hearing from you. And this new moon is a partial solar eclipse in Aries at 9 degrees Aries in 0 minutes. And it can be viewed from Europe, Asia, Africa, North and South America, the Atlantic and Arctic Ocean. So here we have the chart for the new moon in Aries, and we've used the location of Seattle. And the moon and the sun are circled because they're conjoining for this new moon. It's in Aries, a cardinal sign that's about initiating and creating. It's a fire element, so passion, energy. The planetary ruler is Mars, and new moons are about new beginnings, creativity, and initiation. Would you like to add anything, Simon?
Well, since this new moon is an eclipse, that makes it a little different because eclipses are cosmic wildcards. They can be seen like a bit of a reset button in the topics pertaining to the sign that they're in. So in this case, since it's a solar eclipse, we might see a reset on leadership. Certainly with regard to things like executive function, our ability to be decisive and bold and courageous. And the thing about eclipses is that they're unpredictable. Like I said, cosmic wild card. And so we will certainly see things that that may be archetypally aligned with what I've just said. And at the same time, maybe it turns out in a completely different way than we would have expected. And so, Aries rules the head. So anything pertaining to our heads, some folks might have headaches, for example. Some people, might slip and fall and hit their heads. Okay. But since it's a solar eclipse rather than a lunar eclipse, I would expect to see fewer things pertaining to the body like that and more things pertaining to to abstract ideas related to the head, to our minds, and to our consciousness. And at the same time, definitely, the sun does relate to leadership. So seeing people, some people might step up in a new way that we've never seen them do before. Other people might step back who we have previously seen be very, upfront and being the one in charge. So it should be an interesting time, as eclipse seasons tend to be.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, doing your new moon wishes, I have not included them in this episode because it's like you said, it's a wild card. So, be patient and you can still ask for stuff, but be careful what you ask for because it might be who knows what. And I'm already hearing people having headaches. So, we're at Aries is in, the sun is in Aries already, so it's already in that. We've started spring, so we're at that 0 point, and planets are starting to move into Aries. So that is a possibility. And I've heard several people talk about that they're having headaches off and on. That it's like, why do I have a headache? And they don't often get one. So that was
Um,
good information.
yeah, that actually really, you just reminded me of something when you said that, which is that both Venus and Mercury, which are retrograde in Aries at this point, and both have crossed over that eclipse point. In fact, if I remember correctly, that's where Mercury's stationed. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, so I suspect then that the people who are experiencing more headaches than usual, it might simply be because those points are getting repeatedly triggered. That eclipse point is getting repeatedly triggered. And again, for anyone who has natal placements at or near that eclipse point. Hi, my moon's around there. So not quite at 9 degrees, but close, very close. Um, so yeah, that is a good basic rule when we're looking at astrology transits, and especially very potent ones like eclipses, is that if you have natal placements that are close to those points, then you're more likely to experience effects that are archetypally aligned with that transit. Whereas somebody who doesn't have anything anywhere near 9 degrees of the cardinal signs is probably less likely to experience direct effects from the eclipse. But do keep in mind that even if you don't have anything near that point, other people near you might. And they might be going a little bonkers as a result of that kind of contact with their natal chart.
Well, and regardless if you have a planet around that degree, everybody has Aries somewhere in their chart. So the sun traveling through the sign of Aries, I always think of it as lighting up that area of your life, whatever house that could be, that those things are kind of waking up or getting more attention, or they need more attention. So, uh,
Yeah, and that's the thing about eclipses, as you said, the sun lights up that area of your chart, but an eclipse cuts off the light. And so that's also something that we can look to when we're trying to understand the archetypes of an eclipse is, okay, what was lit up that is now suddenly dark?
right,
Okay.
right. Okay, I think we'll go on, but I don't want to forget to add Neptune into the picture later on in the
Right.
show because I
Right.
think it's very prominent.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll talk a little bit about the sign of Aries. The mantra is I am. The ruling planet is Mars. And again, it's a cardinal sign that initiates, creates, begins, and it's the beginning of astrological new year. A fire element about the passion, energy, drive, and I always call it the trailblazer. Would you like to share the keywords and caution, please?
So Aries is adventurous, active, assertive, independent, excited to try new things. The caution is that it can be overly assertive, overly aggressive, can also be really impulsive, and kind of leaps before looking. um, there is this boldness about Aries, but that boldness can also be kind of abrupt, which is hard on more sensitive or delicate signs, who can easily get their feelings hurt by an Aries who is just like, thoughtlessly going through, doing what they're doing, and not realizing that it may have a difficult impact on someone else. And yes, we just saw the Aries Ingress, which we just did a show for a few days ago, and which just happened yesterday. the Aries ingress is the astrological new year. So, this is kind of a good time to get things moving and, and start some new stuff. But this eclipse does kind of mean that maybe we should hold off until the eclipse is done if our new endeavor or passion project requires some very typically Aries traits, that boldness, that willingness to be maybe a little aggressive, that to kind of push through things without thinking too hard about them. One of the things I think is really useful for Aries energy, both Liz and I are Capricorns, so we are both inclined to plan. The astrologer Bob Mark says a goat without a plan is a sad goat indeed. And I quite agree with him. But there's only so much you can spend time planning and being cautious and, setting your ducks in a row and all of that. Eventually, you have to actually do something. And
Yes.
Aries is really good for taking the decisive action after you've already done your thinking about it, done your planning, done all of your, setting things up. Then Aries is just like, enough planning already. Let's get this off the ground. And so I, as a Capricorn Sun, Aries Moon, that is one thing about that cardinal combination that I really, really enjoy is, Aries impulsiveness can be really useful. If you have to rush into a burning building to save somebody, you want Aries energy for that.
Right.
You don't want to
Aries acts and reacts, and sometimes without thinking, but in the more mature part of that, it does think a little bit and makes a choice. But sometimes it's like better not to think and just make a choice or a decision and act. So
right.
I agree with you completely. So the out of bounds planets are a planet that exceeds the declination of 23 degrees and 27 minutes north or south. And they're planets out of the bounds of the sun, and they act on their own and act out of character. So Mars is still out of bounds until April 7th. So we're getting towards the end of the Mars out of bound period. And the moon will not be out of bounds on this new moon, but for March, it was out of bounds the 20th through the 24th for the later part of March. So here's the chart again for Seattle for that new moon. And I think we're going to just jump to the next chart, if that's okay, Simon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's very few aspects with this new moon. We have the sun and moon conjunct, of course, and they're conjunct Mercury retrograde. So I'll let you tell us all about that, Simon.
So, and we can see the eclipse is actually very loosely conjoining that Mercury retrograde. It looks like Mercury is at the world point at 0 degrees, getting ready to head back into Pisces. But of course, as I mentioned, Mercury stationed on the degree of the eclipse. So even though it's a wide conjunction, it's definitely, we can see why there's some Mercury retrograde influence going on here, that extra layer. And, that combination, we've got both Mercury and Venus are retrograde right now. Venus at this point will have gone back into Pisces and is conjoining Neptune again, which she did at the beginning of February. And so this is an interesting combination. We've got two personal planets retrograde doing all this reconsidering, reviewing, sussing out, what things from the past do we want to revisit when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to social connections, how we conduct ourselves. And that's very interesting because Aries is known for being very bold and brash. And so here during this retrograde period, when we're doing all this reconsidering how we communicate in the case of the Mercury retrograde, reconsidering how we think about things, and how we handle information, including information technology. I unplugged my internet right before the show by accident, a completely Mercury retrograde action, which is why we got off to a bit of a late start. But yes, so Mercury retrograde is of course going to deal with those things as well. And so I really feel with this, like all these planets, they're so close together, right? We've got Saturn approaching the North Node. We've got Venus conjunct Neptune. We've got Mercury loosely conjunct the eclipse that is on the degree of Mercury station. That combination then, it's hard to separate these influences, right? And they are in that space of, what was past, what needs to come to an end, what needs to begin, but oh wait, what do we need to reconsider before we can begin? And we've just had the sun's ingress into Aries. Like I said, Aries is great energy for starting stuff, but oh wait, this eclipse says, whoa, something is going to change, something unforeseen is going to happen that is going to impact our plans, okay? That is going to impact our sense of purpose, since it's the sun. The sun is our core sense of purpose, our consciousness, the light of consciousness. And in Aries, I am. For certain spiritual traditions, that is really fundamental to what it means to be on the planet. That when everything around us changes, there is still that light of consciousness, that core sense of self. Okay? And so now that core sense of self is suddenly having the lights turned out. But they're not turned out forever.
Like what you did, you accidentally unplugged your internet. And so it was kind of like we were talking about the solar eclipse, and you kind of were practicing that energy in your home, and it took a little longer for that internet to come back on.
Yep, exactly. And so I do, yeah, thanks for tying that in there, because I do feel like, we may have this desire to get raring and going, especially here in the Northern Hemisphere where this is spring energy, right? But the eclipse, turning out the lights for a moment, it might take a little fumbling around in the dark before we get things back on and get things moving forward. And in combination with two retrogrades happening at the same time, then, oh, yeah, it may take a bit for us to actually get back on our feet and get really moving again and know which direction we're moving and what it is that is going to really light up our sense of purpose again. With Venus conjoining Neptune, there is also a greater sense of or potential for a sense of compassion. But there can also be more, just kind of feeling like, oh, things are kind of awful. There's like, why are things not going the way that I want? We can get the poor me's really, really bad during this kind of time. So if that is the case, if you're experiencing that, it's important to remember, to remind yourself, hey, this is only temporary. There is this intense stuff going on, whether in the skies or on planet Earth, but those intense things do not last forever. And the great thing about the cosmic reset button is that things may change in a way that we do not expect, but that actually is for the better.
Right. So if you've just recently started a new project, there might be some adjustment or like a on pause or on hold for a period, a short period of time. And then, it might feel like, oh no, I don't want to do that, but I think it'll work out better because it'll probably bring in something that maybe you didn't think of, or and make it better.
Yeah.
And then I want to add that Neptune the next day ingresses into at 0 degrees Aries at that Aries point. So, since it's within a day, and I should have counted the hours, but I'm sure it's within hours actually of happening. That energy is filtering in to this new moon also. So our dreams and our visions all changing. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so this is like it's just one of the great big pieces of astrology for both this year and the next. Um, I've talked here a fair amount. Liz and I have discussed this on this show multiple times about how all of the outer planets are changing signs, from yin signs to yang signs, from water and earth signs to air and fire. Okay. And Neptune is the planet that relates to our imaginations, our vision, our hopes, our dreams, but also our illusions, our delusions. Okay. And Pluto already moved into Aquarius for good back in November. Uranus is going to move into Gemini this summer, I believe at the beginning of July. But Neptune's going to do this little dance, like we've been seeing with the Venus and Mercury retrograde, where they go into Aries for a little bit, and then they station retrograde, and they go back out of Aries and into Pisces before they station direct. And that is what is going to happen with Neptune. Now, we can see Saturn is, following up, gaining some ground after Saturn's previous retrograde. Saturn is applying to a conjunction with the North Node. And then this summer, after Saturn enters Aries, Saturn is going to be within a degree of a conjunction with Neptune, but will not actually perfect that conjunction until they've both gone retrograde and then forward again. And then they will conjoin at the world point of 0 degrees Aries in February of 2026. And so that combination of our hopes and dreams and ideals, our imagination, our compassion, our spiritual yearnings, combined, with Saturn, the cosmic taskmaster, who shows us our fears and our insecurities and our inhibitions, shows us where we think we're not up to the task ahead of us, where we think that we have been given the short end of the stick by the universe, where we experience hardship, okay, where we think life is unfair, and at the same time, where we have a sense of what is real, what is solid, what are boundaries that need to be asserted, what are our limitations, sure, so that we have to prioritize what matters most. I very much feel like Saturn is about, what hill are we willing to die upon? Okay. What matters so much that it cannot be left undone? What matters so much that we are willing to persevere through all kinds of hardships in order to achieve it? And at that 0 degree of Aries, then, which is where Mercury is right now, and therefore is calling to mind that both the Neptune Aries ingress that is about to happen and that conjunction, that fateful conjunction with Saturn, okay, that's already hanging out in the back of that Aries mind there, okay? And so we see here this combination of what are our hopes and dreams and what is the reality that we have to ground them in. How are we going to make our ideals real? How are we going to make
Exactly.
them real?
Well, and Saturn will help us to realize our dreams and goals too, or it'll, maybe put people together that have a similar or want to work for the same project, or that they like that idea and they want to work together so it's easier to accomplish. And I think of these planets, going into Aries as a preview, and then they back up into Pisces to go back and finish up something. And so it's like we get a preview of what's coming, finish up something, then go back into Aries, and then really do the effort, the work, the new project. It's like really get it off the ground and get it going.
And the thing about Saturn is that things that Saturn touches, if they survive the process, because of course Saturn does put endings to some things, okay? But the things that actually do go forward after a contact with Saturn are the things that are built to last. Saturn is foundational. And here at the world point of Aries, that Mercury right now, during this eclipse, is making us mindful of, okay, there is that sense that something momentous is starting. That's something that is going to last for a long, long time is starting. And that things are ending that have been going on for way too long, long past their pull date. Saturn conjoining Neptune at that 0 degrees of Aries is not a common transit. We're talking thousands of years between that transit. And so this, we're getting the reverberations of that through Mercury at that 0 degrees of Aries. And so this eclipse, this new moon, is very layered, not in the ways that we usually see. We're not seeing, all the big prominent aspects going across the chart. Instead, it's all in this very concentrated space.
Well, and we've had quite a bit of that the last several months too, so that's amazing. And going from Neptune being in Pisces, it's like there's compassion to it, but it's like kind of being used to things being a certain way. But it's almost like when it gets to Aries, it really brings things to the surface and exposes what isn't working. So
Yeah, and I do feel like there is, Neptune at that 29th degree definitely conjures up, what the Germans call Weltschmerz, the world sorrow,
oh,
okay,
okay.
our sadness and grief for the things that are changing, or the things that have been lost, or the things that have been dying, the various species that are going extinct right now, and the ways of life that we have previously gotten so used to, even if they weren't good for us. There is still, we still mourn when things change. Humans tend to be kind of change averse. you know Even when it's a change for the better. And remember that Ceres is still co-present here in Pisces as well. And in fact, she's actually, oh yeah, that's right, she's sextile Aia in Taurus. So that's interesting, because that's the reminder for us to be really good to our bodies right now, because we are processing big feelings, and these kind of, and these retrogrades and this eclipse, and there's all this challenging stuff. And we had that lunar eclipse a couple of weeks ago, and it's just so much. So being good to our bodies, making sure we get rest, making sure we get good food, and making sure that we spend time paying attention to what is enjoyable in life on kind of a simple creature comfort kind of level, will really help us during this time.
And I'm going to make a comment about change, because we know what to expect when things stay the same. And even though it might not be the best, it's like we are familiar with that. And so being unfamiliar, not knowing what the next day will bring or the future will bring, it can be uncomfortable. But, humans have been here on Earth for a long time, and we keep continuing moving forward. And there's been a lot of good, medical advances and technology advances. And, there's advances in all kinds of things. I mean, we have the internet. I mean, isn't it nice to have information at your fingertips? I appreciate that. So are we ready to go to the next slide?
Yep.
So we do have a few other aspects within the chart. We have some trines and sextiles mostly here. So Mars is trine Saturn, and Uranus is trine the South Node, and Jupiter is trine Pallas Athena. So you want to start talking about those, Simon?
So Mars is applying to the trine with Saturn, because of Mars's retrograde. And this will be a repeat, a revisiting of that trine, and therefore wrapping up some of that energy. They are both malefics, and that means they tend to do their jobs in ways that humans can find maybe a little challenging, but they are both still trying to do things that, even if we find them challenging, they can still sometimes be useful. I do feel like in this context in particular, they're both in water signs. Mars is considered to be in his fall at the moment. He's in a sign where he doesn't have the resources he normally likes to have. Mars rules Aries and is a go-getter, right? It's all about, how do I get what I want? And how do I protect what I want? Omari Martin says that when Mars is doing what Mars is supposed to be doing, he's like a good bodyguard by her side. Okay? He protects our interests and keeps us safe. In Cancer, Mars is very concerned with safety, particularly emotional safety, but also the safety of our family, our friends, our homes. And when there's a lot of upheaval going on in the world, then Mars in Cancer is going to be like, oh, no, I want to protect what's mine. Okay. And trine Saturn, then, Saturn, I've talked very much about it. Yes, Saturn can relate to our fears. Saturn can relate to our insecurities. And so that combination can feed into each other, right? But at the same time, Saturn in Pisces has also been very much about cultivating emotional discipline, emotional maturity, being able to handle things on an emotional level that we might not have thought we could handle before. Saturn in Pisces can very much relate to, in tarot, that Eight of Cups energy, that sense of emotional draining. Like, oh my goodness, when is it going to end? Right? Because Saturn is like, endings. Endings are important. Putting limits on things is important. And that does include putting limits on what we are willing to get in our feelings about. Okay? There's only so much that we can handle. The news cycle gets really crazy and scary, and we're like, oh my goodness, it's the roller coaster feeling. But our bodies and our psyches can only handle so much stress at a time. And so I do feel like this is a lot of stress management is factored into this trine. Prioritization of what we are trying to safeguard, knowing that big changes are going on all around us, and there is only so much we can do in the day. So what are we most concerned with protecting? What are we most concerned with keeping safe and emotionally sound? Okay. And other things are going to have to go by the wayside. You know? And since that Mars is ruling this eclipse, then that does bring our feelings into the situation. The sun's light is being eclipsed, but the moon is what's doing the eclipsing, right? That means our feelings may be eclipsing our good sense. So we might want to remember that if we get like really in our feelings about stuff, if we get defensive, if we get, to that point where we're feeling like, I don't care what those other folks over there have to say because they're offending me, or I'm worried about them. I want to protect my own stuff. Well, with Neptune still in Pisces and at that 29th degree, and Venus retrograde hanging out with that Neptune, we're still going to be, it's going to be hard to ignore, the feelings of other people as well as our own. And so we have to find a way to take actions that are in alignment with our feelings without going off half-cocked. Okay. And that is what I do think the benefit of the Saturn trine is that Saturn is a stabilizing force. So then we've got Uranus in the South Node. Uranus, great change maker, great liberator, shakes things up, can be agitating. But in this trine with the South Node, then there is that sense of letting go, that things are getting shaken up so that we will be willing to let go of what no longer serves us, and in particular, let go of the need for perfection, which, Virgo is associated with perfectionism. Remember that South Node is also ruled by this Mercury retrograde hanging out at the world point. Okay. And since Mercury is at the world point, I do feel like, the things that are going on in mundane astrology, in the nation's astrology, for those of us in the United States, in the world astrology, for everybody, we may see some continued political shakeups. I mean, that's not a hard prediction to make, right? That's just continuing what's been going on. But I do feel like the potential sense of loss with liberation, that the balance between loss and liberation is going to be a big factor. And we have to remember, again, just because you don't like the changes, just because you don't like losing things, doesn't mean that you can't find ways to make it helpful to you. That is the one superpower of us Capricorns. We see silver linings in all sorts of difficult things.
And we have to oftentimes release things to make room or to be able to move forward, because if we keep the old way, then that can prevent us, or we won't have the time to move forward on something different or start a new project. It's like, we're evolving constantly.
Yep. And that's the thing. I mean, literal, whether it's physical clutter, since it's an earth sign, or whether it's mental clutter, since Virgo is ruled by Mercury, right? Clutter can make it difficult to move around, make it difficult to see things clearly. If if you've got a haystack, it's hard to look for the needle, right?
That's true. That's true. And if you're spending all your time watching movies or something, you don't have time for other things.
Right. Or that your mind is cluttered
Mhm.
with the stuff that is, maybe may stimulate your imagination. Remember, the North Node is hanging out with Neptune there. But it's very easy for us to get caught up in distractions and to not see clearly the things that we need to be able to see clearly. And especially when there's the kind of the political showmanship that is going on. Um, it can be difficult for us to see clearly what we need to see and to prioritize. So again, that Saturn moving toward the North Node and then moving toward that fateful conjunction with Neptune, I do think that there is going to be this, oh, wait a minute. There's going to be a potential for some clarity there. We've been in this space where Jupiter, trine Pallas Athena now, Jupiter, who is the traditional ruler of Pisces, has been in detriment in Gemini, ruled by that Mercury retrograde. For so long, Jupiter's been, this past year has been in this space of amplifying information, amplifying communication, but not necessarily in a way that is helpful. Okay, there can be lots of this, scattered squirrel kind of thinking, and lots of distractions, lots of uncertainty about the truthfulness of the information that we get. Okay, and so that Jupiter, who is now trine Pallas, first of all, that's helpful that it can actually give us some wisdom to be able to sort through some of the information that we're getting, can give us the capability for planning, for strategic thinking, for the ability to better sort that information. Remember that Pallas Athena not only is the goddess of wisdom and a goddess of warfare, but it's also a goddess of weaving. And weaving is actually a very orderly process of many, many little threads. And so we can see, Jupiter has many informational threads that now Pallas is like, oh, I know what to do with these. I know what to do with these, which is to my mind, that is wonderful after the past year of like, oh my goodness, what do I do with all of this? Pallas is like, oh, no. I know what to do. Okay. So I find that to be a really lovely background energy for this eclipse, because, the other things I've described about the things that impact how we're thinking during an eclipse, that might seem, oh, I don't like the idea of the light being shut out. I don't like the idea of the light of consciousness suddenly, going poof. Okay. But Jupiter trine Pallas can help us to sort through some information in that darkness, maybe on some feeling or unconscious levels, since it's also governing all that stuff in Pisces. I think that's very useful. We've also got all these sextiles. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. We have Pluto sextile to Juno, and Pluto is also sextile to Neptune and Mercury. So, they're connecting 3 points. It's like we don't have any aspect patterns that are connecting per se, but we have all these aspects. And then we also,
Actually, Mercury is trine Juno.
oh, okay.
We didn't see that before. That's a minor grand trine.
Wow, yeah, I missed that one.
So did I. So did I. I just saw it just now. Like, oh my goodness.
Right, and then we have Uranus, sextile Saturn, North Node, Venus, and Neptune. So go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, lots of sextiles. Sextiles are nice and supportive, which I think is that's good, given that there's an eclipse going on, right? Getting some support is very, very nice. Yeah, I can't believe we didn't, that neither one of us saw that Juno trine Mercury. So in combination then with, Juno sextile Pluto and Pluto sextile Neptune and Mercury, that's a minor grand trine. And that really gives us some sense of support with regard to the things that we're reconsidering, the information that we're reconsidering now. I do think it's important to recognize that when Mercury is in hard aspect with Neptune, that lies can become prominent, as well as delusions, both, conscious, intentional deception and, unconscious. Oh, I thought this was so and it was not. Okay. And Pluto sextile that then can indicate that folks in power will make use of deception, or folks who have wealth, because Pluto can relate to wealth. Pluto definitely relates to oligarchs. Okay. That they can feel supported by, can gain support from deception. So be aware of that. Juno is retrograde here in this minor grand trine. And Juno relates to our oaths, our promises. But here she is reconsidering our oaths, our promises. So yeah, I think we could see some big lies come out of this. Even if we don't see them at this time, we may see the consequences of them later. Okay. So that's not so great. But at the same time, because Juno is reconsidering, what have we committed ourselves to? Is that actually what we want to be committed to? What are the institutions that matter to us, and are we really actually willing to do the things we have been doing in order to keep them going? Or do we need to take very different actions? And those very different actions could be very good, okay, but they do require that we reconsider them now, especially with that Mercury being retrograde, trine Juno retrograde, that combination. And I feel like, I mean, I could be wrong about this, but I feel like that Mercury Neptune conjunction is going to point out to us where we've been lied to. A sextile Pluto reveals what is rotten, what is
It brings it up like a volcano and puts it out there. So the information that maybe hasn't been truthful, or, I mean, they did release the JFK Kennedy files that, hadn't been. So it's like finally something that's been hidden or a secret has been revealed. So there's probably going to be a lot more of those kind of things.
Right. That one's interesting because, that one's kind of a anticlimactic, since the things that got revealed were actually things that really shouldn't be revealed, namely people's social security numbers. I mean, oh my goodness, people expecting like, ooh, conspiracy theory stuff to be revealed. Nope. It's just this very mundane stuff with a big impact, that people are actually, that the people whose social security numbers got revealed are actually going to have to get whole new social security numbers, at a point when many of them are old enough that that's just like so not practical. So there's that. But yes, I feel like when both Juno and Mercury station direct, then I feel like that's when we may be seeing the impact of the lies that Pluto is bringing to the surface, that Pluto is showing us what's corrupt, what's messed up. And so that could be very powerful. For now, I would definitely say that the Mercury Juno trine is going to ask us, what are our, in particular, what are our beliefs around certain institutions, as well as our actions moving forward. Juno is in Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, and definitely relates to the beliefs surrounding our institutions. For the United States of America, what are the principles of being an American? What unites us? What unites the country? Lots of division that's been going on in this country in recent years, but it's a 250-year-old country, and there are certain ideals that kept it moving forward for all of that time. So now we need to reconsider, what are the ideals of being an American? What are those ideals that we're going to go forward with? And what do we leave behind? And that could go either very well or very poorly. Okay. I mean, do we leave liberty behind? Do we go into authoritarianism? I can't make that decision for all of my fellow Americans, but it is something that is hanging out in the backs of our minds at this point, or sometimes forward, depending upon how much we're giving thought to this stuff. But, this is something that is going to impact our society one way or another. So now's the time to be thinking about it. Uranus is sextile to Saturn right now. That's interesting, because that, Uranus is that great change maker who shakes things up and brings sudden, shocking change. And in Taurus, can relate to the natural disasters that we've been seeing, the floods, the fires, seismic activity. I've been getting lots of notices of seismic activity lately.
Tornadoes have been massive.
Yeah. And so in combination with Saturn, then remember what I said about, malefics, when malefics get together. Now, technically, the outer planets are, they're not traditionally considered malefics, but they can have actions that humans find difficult to handle because they are the transpersonal planets. They are operating on a much bigger level, on a generational level, on a world-shaking kind of level. And so you combine Uranus with Saturn then, and there can be some anxiety. There can be worries about what are the practical impacts of the changes going on around us, and especially when we're looking at natural disaster kinds of situations that have been ramping up as climate change continues to hurtle forward unabated. At the same time, remember, Saturn is also stabilizing. Saturn in Pisces is saying you can actually endure much more than you thought. You can actually exercise much more patience and self-discipline than you thought. You're leveling up in gamer speak. We've been in kind of these big boss battles for a while. and now we're leveling up. And we can try to, stick our heels in the mud and not move forward, but we're going to get dragged kicking and screaming into the future, whether we like it or not. So we might as well, instead of like digging our heels in and getting dragged, we might as well pick ourselves up, pull on our big boy and girl panties and move forward. And so I really feel like that Saturn Uranus combination is the ability to roll with the punches, is the ability to get some inspiration and some silver linings out of our hardships, to gain some practical insight. That's something we forget sometimes about Uranus, is that Uranus can be genius. Uranus can be those sudden flashes of insight that like completely change our perspective, those light bulb moments. Saturn and Uranus combining then like this can be those insights that can help us to enact lasting change that is actually helpful to us. So, and of course, that sextile then, pulls in some of the energies of that North Node and Venus and Neptune. And so again, there's that sense of faithfulness of things much larger than ourselves that we are tapped into now. And so, yes, that's a lot. Emotionally, it's a lot. It's a lot on our minds. The eclipse may help to kind of tamp down our thinking for a little bit. As it takes the light away from the sun. Oops.
That might be good. It might be a rest or a pause. That might be great.
But if it proves to be a lot for us to process and handle right now, I do want to remind us again of that Ceres Aia sextile that says, be kind to your body. Give yourself time to process grief for what is ending. And pay attention to what nourishes you, both physically and emotionally.
And I would say, since this eclipse is in Aries, that some kind of activity would be good. I'm not saying to go run a 5K if you can barely walk to the mailbox, but, even if you just walk a half a block or around your house, it's just like a little bit extra physical activity than what you're used to doing could be very, very helpful, and taking care of yourself, like you've mentioned several times.
Yeah, that's very good advice, Liz. Speaking as an Aries moon native, physical action can help you to process the things that you may be feeling.
Exactly. So here we have a few more aspects in the chart that I want us to review. We have Uranus opposite Juno, Jupiter square Ceres, Vesta square Pallas Athena, and one quincunx with Vesta quincunx Jupiter. So wherever you'd like to start, go ahead.
Oh, let's start with that quincunx. So Vesta is in Scorpio and therefore Mars ruled. And so, interestingly enough, Vesta, Scorpio as a sign, quincunxes Aries as a sign. Okay. And yet they are both ruled by Mars. So they have a little more affinity than most quincunxes do. But in this case, we've got, Vesta in Scorpio, which deals with our deep emotions, okay, our deep, intense feelings. Quincunxing Jupiter in Gemini, ruled by that Mercury retrograde, and generally inclined toward lightness and surface things. Okay, Gemini is sorting of data, and when you're sorting lots of data, you can't get too deeply into any one thing. Whereas Vesta's like, I want to go deep, right? And so, of course, they're going to have some difficulty understanding each other. Now, Vesta relates to our focus. What is our sacred flame? What lights us up? What keeps us going? What is important to us? Jupiter is our faith and our hope and our optimism. Okay. But they're in such very different signs right now that they're having trouble understanding each other, even though they are connected. Now, that's also interesting because, Scorpio can show the things in our feelings that we may not wish to consciously acknowledge, or that may not, go over well in polite society, right? Taboo topics. Certainly relates to all of the things that are not considered polite conversation over dinner. So, sex, money, religion, politics, psychology, death, and power. Okay. All of those actually have some relationship with power. Okay. And so Vesta in Scorpio has a certain ruthlessness, a willingness to do whatever it takes for the sake of that which we hold sacred, that which we are focused on. Whereas Jupiter in Gemini is like, oh, shiny. It's like a golden retriever chasing a squirrel, or chasing lots of squirrels. But from a mundane astrology standpoint, I do think that this is an important aspect to consider, because Jupiter can relate to, among other things, judges. Okay. Certainly relates to leadership, but in particular, judges. And what have we been seeing in the United States? Those who have ruthless goals being unwilling to pay attention to what the judges have to say. And yet the judges are like, oh, but wait, I'm still here. I'm still talking about this. Okay. So we may see a showdown over that. We may see some interesting developments as a result of that, because they are connected whether they want to be or not. Okay. And locally, for those of us here in Seattle, that may even be more applicable, because here in this Seattle chart, Vesta is in the 9th house, which does relate to the higher mind, but also to judges. And it's right up there near the midheaven, which, when we're looking at things related to the government, we'll see them a lot at the midheaven. Okay. So there's that. So then we've got Juno in a Jupiter-ruled sign of Sagittarius. Okay. Retrograde and loosely opposing Uranus. Juno is preparing to retrograde back into Scorpio. I would also actually say that based on the orb, Vesta is actually opposite Uranus. Vesta is also retrograde. Okay. So we've got this kind of cluster up there by the midheaven for the Seattle chart. That again is really stirring up things with regard to the social contract. Uranus, can divvy things up, split things up, shake things up. And so therefore is potentially going to, continue to really shake up, especially as these oppositions become tighter. Right now they're loose, but we're looking, they're going to tighten up. And so we may see some real real challenges between, what are our ideals and our oaths, our promises, the institutions we want to keep alive, and what is this inexorable force of change that is saying, guess what? Some of this ain't going to last. Okay, well, technically, all things don't last, but but some of these are going away sooner than others. Okay, so lots of shakeups that are going on. We've seen that already, and this just continues that process. But now, in that process, is asking us to reconsider our ideals, our philosophy about the social order, the social contract, and what are we determined to and willing to go through hell to uphold. That Vesta in Scorpio is willing to go through hell to uphold what she deems sacred. Now, she's reconsidering that because she's retrograde. But when she stations direct, we're going to be moving forward and saying, okay, here's what I'm willing to go through hell in order to uphold. Here is the part of the social contract that matters to me, and here is the part that I am willing to let go by the wayside. And that, in a society that is already going through some chaos, may bring some more chaos. So just be aware of that. Not from a standpoint of like, oh, I have to get more scared. Because, as I've said, with Saturn and Pisces, there's only so much we can handle, right? Eventually we get tired of it. We're like, oh, I'm not scared anymore because I just don't have the energy for scared. Okay. But rather in the sense of, if we're going to go with some of the changes that are going on, or if we're going to resist some of the changes that were going on, we need to make some educated choices about it. And that's what these retrogrades are really doing for us, is to help us make some educated choices about it. So, Vesta square Pallas. So since Vesta is retrograde right now, our focus is probably a little more, I would say it's being emphasized, but it's very emotional focus. It may be, because it's in Scorpio, it may be hidden. Okay. It may be that we, don't want anyone else to see what we are focused on. But squaring Pallas, then it challenges our wisdom. Okay. How our feelings are having us focused, where our feelings are focused, may really be challenging our ability to plan for the future, our ability to plan wisely, our ability to sort through the information we need to sort through, our ability to think tactically. Particularly with regard to what kind of a society do we want. Remember that Pallas is in Aquarius, ruled by that Saturn, traditionally ruled by Uranus, according to some modern astrologers. And even for a stodgy stick in the mud Capricorn like myself, I can't ignore that Uranus does have some ties to, or an affinity for, Aquarius. And so, Saturn and Aquarius, going back to the sextile that they've currently got, they both have a relationship with Aquarius, and they're both in cahoots with each other. Okay. And so, yes, there are these shakeups to society, and at the same time, considering what should be the structure of society. And Pallas, then, in Aquarius, is aware of both considerations. What is going to need to be changed? What are we going to need to hold on to so that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater? But when our emotional focus may be running away with us, that can make it difficult for us to have the objective dispassionate way of seeing these things that Pallas can have. And so these two, then, this Vesta and this Pallas, are kind of at loggerheads right now. Okay. Let's go back to that Jupiter in Gemini, which is the other side of that quincunx that is kind of connecting this stuff. So Jupiter in Gemini is square Ceres. And I do find that one interesting because if you look at the, the Demeter Persephone myth, Demeter or Ceres was mourning her daughter being taken from her, wandering the world, plunging it into snow and starving the human population. And in the process, putting herself at odds with the Olympian order represented by Jupiter. Okay. And for those, for people who are currently feeling very upset, very shaken up by the ongoing events, whether in the United States or elsewhere in the world, we have to remember there's a lot going on politically all over the world right now. There's a certain kind of, even though Ceres is in Pisces, I feel like there's that tie into the Saturnian. Remember, she's applying to the conjunction with Saturn. Saturn and Jupiter are going to have one more of their squares this summer. And so I feel like there is that sense of where we can be so thoroughly in our grief and our feelings and our potential resistance to what is going on around us, that it's like it's not the same digging in of our heels as we see with a fixed sign. Okay, this is, I'm willing to slog through my grief for the long haul, and it is not putting up with the stuff that I'm being bombarded with. Okay, that this is a different kind of resistance than you see with a fixed sign or with a cardinal sign, and that our feelings are resistant to what is going on, both on kind of the government level, but also the level of, what is the faith that we have always had or that we have maintained for a long time? Not just religious faith, but our kind of day-to-day faith that, that the information we were getting from, like, say, the news or from authorities is truthful. Okay. That things were going to progress in a good, orderly direction in society, even if there were some hiccups along the way. And right now, I feel like that Jupiter Ceres square is, no, this is not the way that I am willing to cooperate with it being. Okay. So I do feel like even if people are not actively out in the streets protesting things, and there are people who are, but even when people aren't, I do feel like there is this kind of resistance that is going on an emotional level to the things that are happening. And keep in mind that this is not specific to any one political party. This is not specific to any one outlook. Okay. I feel like actually that this is pretty encompassing for a lot of people, even if they're not mourning the same things, even if they're not struggling with the same things. The feeling is more universal than not. That what we're experiencing in terms of the information that is coming at us is completely at odds with how we feel and what we are mourning. So again, that's stuff to process. Remember, Jupiter makes whatever he touches bigger. So we're back to the big feelings, okay? And, we've been slogging through big feelings all this spring with that pile up in Pisces, okay? So again, it can seem like, oh my goodness, when are things going to end? Well, you know what? All things come to an end. All things come to an end. Um, it just happens to be taking a while.
Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. And, if to help us process our emotions, journaling might be helpful, or having a counselor or a good friend or confidant would be helpful. Um, and I want to thank you for joining me today. And I want to thank all those that are watching live today. We appreciate your support, and all those that watch in the future. So, is there any other things that you would want to leave the audience with of how to work through this solar eclipse? And we had spring equinox and the eclipses all sandwiched together. So March has been a pretty busy month. A lot of energy shifts are happening. So as much as you can, I would say go with the shifts, feel your feelings, and take the time to process them. Do you want to add anything to that?
Definitely be good to your bodies. Like I said, with the series IE sextile, that's the thing about sextile energy is that it can kind of be something that we forget about, but it is there for us to draw on if we're willing to be conscious and remember it. So that's a big one that I would say, remember that. Be good to your body. Um, uh, let yourself feel your feelings, and they're big feelings right now. But also do the kind of practical creature comfort body care that can help you to ground that so you don't get washed away in it. Um, and remember, with the moon in Aries, there may be some, I'll just put it out there, some anger, okay? It's Mars ruled. And Mars being in Cancer, there's a mutual reception that is going on between the moon and Mars, okay? So they are each in each other's home. They are each supportive of each other, but what they're being supportive of may be a lot of rar. Rar. Okay. So recognize that if you get, like, for example, if you get like sudden anger out of nowhere that you don't know where that came from or how to deal with that, okay? Taking a walk or doing some other physical activity to help process is definitely a good idea since it's the moon in Aries. And remember, this too shall pass.
Thank you. That's great advice. So I'll let Madam Simon tell you about her Patreon page, etc. Go ahead.
Yes, so I write about the astrological transits on Patreon, and have a little Discord channel and a little community there that can ask pressing astrological questions. And I also do custom astrological art for my patrons. I definitely like to help people to understand what's going on in the skies through having imagery. Even very simple imagery can sometimes just help us to, get a real sense of the archetypes at work and the elements in play. So yeah, so if you're interested in that, come and join us there. Also, like Liz, I am a consulting astrologer. So if you wish to schedule a consultation with me, my website is iconalchemy.com.
Thank you. And I do consultations. I have a newsletter, and you're on my YouTube channel. So subscribe and like. And if you want a consultation, contact me. And other shows that I do with Astrology Star Sisters are Chinese astrology, decans using astrology and tarot, dwarf planets, fixed stars, planet stationing, Uranian astrology, and Venus star point Astrology, and some new this year was the 2025 Astrological highlights, and there's still a couple more shows of that. Beginning a Cosmic Connections relationship astrology show and magical astrology. And Justin and I do the astrology forecast and the full moon forecast each month, and from time to time, the Chiron asteroid series. I will be on Talk Cosmos on March 30th, also talking about the Aries solar eclipse in a different way than what I've brought you today. And so you can watch it live here or come back at your convenience and watch when you have time. And again, Simon's website is iconalchemy.com, and my website is alightpath.com. And thanks, Simon, for being here today. And thanks to the audience. And we're going to say goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time.